Complicated Creation by Elemental. Chapter 3. Gone but not forgotten. The debriefing is an extremely uncomfortable one.
We should have put him in cuffs.
Nighteye snarls as they go through the footage. The second half is heavily corrupted, but combined with the guard, Hitoshi, and Shota's reports, they have a complete picture.
It just doesn't make any sense!
Shota winces at the exhaustion lining Nightaye's face, but doesn't bring it up.
I don't think they would have made much difference if I can't erase his quirk.
Quacks!
Nighteye stares as the video feed once again starts to degrade and Deku's farm becomes undefinable, while Hitoshi remains clear.
At this point, I think it is safe to assume he has several.
Like the no-mu? Centipeder asks. He sits across from them, the meeting room containing mostly Nightae's staff, with Fatgum and his interns, and Shota and Hitoshi. He mentioned an institute. Play the video for everyone, Fatgum suggests, seeming to notice how on edge his interns both look. Shota's glad he's onto it. He can't take Kirishima aside right now. Let's get everyone up to speed before we assume anything of the kid. Nighteye types a few commands into his console and the footage plays. It begins with Deku sitting quietly in the holding cell, shifting occasionally and looking at a specific section of the wall.
Judging on his body language, I suspect he is speaking to someone here.
Nighteye says quietly.
It's faint, but you can hear him ask, what, as well.
Shota agrees. Deku's clearly focused on something, though whether it's a hallucination of the boy's making or a telepathic projection, it's hard to say.
He seemed really adamant when I came in,
Hitoshi admits as the feed shows his entrance. The audio here is fine, and the conversation is bland as they discussed Hitoshi's hero status and the time. Then he activates his quirk.
Tell me your name.
Deku!
Tell me your real name.
I don't have one anymore.
What do you mean you don't have one?
I traded it to the crows to escape the instant— Ow! What the hell?! The video footage and audio quality, originally clear, start to degrade, specifically around Deku. On the recording, Hitoshi asks,
How did you do that?
But Deku doesn't answer him. Deku clutches at his arm and looks to the space beside Hitoshi and asks, Oh god, how long? How long was it? What did I do? What did he do to me?
He wasn't looking at me at all,
Hitoshi says, though it's obvious from the way Deku is standing, from the set in his shoulders, even if the footage looks like it's from a 300-year-old VHS tape.
I've never had someone break through my quirk without help, either.
What does he grab there? Sun Eater asks as the footage continues to play.
I didn't see anything. None of us did.
Hitoshi's hands fist on the table.
There was nothing there. His hand was suddenly bloody and he grabbed a fistful of empty air and then my quirk was gone.
The room takes on a whole new level of tension as Shota watches himself arrive in the holding area. The bars on the cell had warped somehow along with the lock. The officer was struggling to open everything, and he remembers thinking suddenly that just because Deku had given them no reason to suspect him of violence didn't mean he wasn't capable of it. He remembers running in and finding Deku with blood on his hands, but no sign of injury, and he'd worried for one split second that he'd hurt Hitoshi somehow. Everyone holds their breath as Deku throws. Nothing. Shota remembers that moment of terror. He'd stopped breathing, had thought of nothing but getting Hitoshi out of there.
Wait. But he wasn't holding anything. You can't see it in the video, but his hand was smoking like something was burning in his grip. At the time, we reacted like it was a threat.
It had been automatic, an assumption of another quirk, and the throw had seemed aggressive.
But nothing happened!
Fatgum is watching the footage, perplexed.
Just that my quirk came back,
Hitoshi admits, and none of them know what to make of that even now.
I could feel the difference, and then
there's the threat, and the promise, and they all watch as Shota's capture weapon begins to circle around the kid and then closes on empty air, the audio turning so garbled it sounds a bit like a group of crows have nested next to the microphone for a second and a half before silence returns. Nighteye ends the playback.
Any questions?
Centipeder is the one to break the silence. What do you think we're dealing with here?
Based on this and the information we received this morning from Red Riot, I have a working theory.
Nighteye tells the room at large.
Much of this is intel that will not leave this room. It is not connected to the Shie Hassaikai case directly, and only Your current involvement is granting you access.
The gaze he levels at Kirishima and Sun Eater is probably for insurance, as they nod to show they understand.
What we know of the normal is this. They are made from the deceased, and the process is used to splice several quirks onto them until the multiplied quirk factor causes extensive mutations. The villains we captured when we rescued Bakugo do not have detailed information, but we have gleaned that much of their own understanding.
It had apparently been a threat carried out against several members. Failure could lead to becoming part of All for One's experiments. Nighteye waits to make sure everyone understands and then continues.
What we also know is that there were experiments done on the living.
He does not flinch, but several in the room do.
The result of multiple quirks would leave those who survived the process unstable.
Fatcom is frowning, hands nervously flexing against the table. And so young Deku?
He knew Bakugo's location.
Nighteye continues.
He gave that information to Red Riot before the raid. That was what allowed them to find the correct warehouse to mount their attempted rescue. He disappeared on them at that time, after convincing them of the accuracy of his information. He was able to manipulate and restore the quirks of multiple heroes, and also was able to dampen or restrict mind blanks when he was agitated. In addition, I think it is clear that he has secondary effects when upset. The boss warping, the power fluctuations, and the manipulation of recorded data.
Shota hates this, but it's the best theory they have.
He has far too much information about us. What could be a quirk, or outside help. Addresses, internal movements, even family status.
Some of that could come from vigilantes, maybe, if Deku isn't working for the League. But maybe he is. Maybe they have something over him, or just... Who did he mean by your dad? Kirishima interrupts and looks at Hitoshi. Is he an officer? Did something happen?
Another reason he is a threat.
Nighteye answers for them, probably to Hitoshi's relief.
There is no public records that should connect Shinso to Eraserhead, and yet he clearly knew.
Aizawa-sensei is your dad!
You're lucky this room is soundproof.
Hitoshi says flatly.
I'm adopted. Can we maybe talk about that later?
Kirishima seems to realize the situation and quiets down. Sorry, so he knew something no one knows?
It's a very well-guarded secret.
Nighteye continues, and damn right it's well guarded. They'd taken Hitoshi on 3 years ago, and it had been worth every minute of stress and sleepless nights. There was no way in hell was he letting his and Hazashi's work put this kid at risk.
I think the major clue, however, is his reaction to Mind Blink's quirk.
Centipeter is the one to nod and lean forward. His expression isn't exactly readable with the mandibles, but his voice is grave. He asked, "What did he make me do?" That isn't what a normal person would say after that experience.
He's been mind control before.
There's something in Hitoshi's voice that worries Shota. A conversation they need to have later. It isn't Hitoshi's fault. He was the one who made the call and brought him in.
I believe the evidence points to this. Records suggest that All for One has taken multiple quirks that allow him to manipulate memories and emotions. It may have been under his control at one time, or potentially someone else's.
I made the wrong call.
Shota tells the room.
I take responsibility for that. He panicked because I asked Hitoshi to speak to him. I believe that leveraging his real name would be useful in understanding what was going on, despite our suspicions of his background.
And worst of all, they somehow still don't even have a name!
Whatever was done to him was thorough.
Nighteye agrees.
His answers to Mind Blank were nearly nonsense. The only lead we have is an institute, likely a medical facility of some sort. We uncovered several from the League of Villains during the raids.
So, what do we do next?
Kirishima asks, looking around the room. Do we look for him?
No.
Nighteye looks to Shota's gaze, a little pained at the admission. He wonders if anyone else would pick up on it.
While I believe he is directly involved with some villains, the specific case we must focus on right now remains the Shie Hassaikai. They are our target. We must stop them before they manage to turn their incidental production into something geared for warfare, and Deku is a dead end in that regard. We do not have much time. I will create a more general warning to issue to heroes on patrol to keep an eye out for this boy and report any sightings. When we have stopped the Shie Hassaikai and Chisaki's plan, then we can form a plan of action regarding Deku, if we have something more to go on. At this point he has disappeared, and we do not have the manpower to track him down, and we will not risk another hero's quirk to draw him out.
Nighteye gives Shota a look, which Shota ignores. It was, at the time, worthwhile.
He has stated he will not assist us further. We must assume that will be the case and act accordingly. Be cautious when patrolling. Ensure that your costumes have been upgraded to include the new support armor. Do not be caught in a firefight alone. We'll discuss what our next steps are this evening when the other teams come back in for patrol. Anything else?
The meeting disbands after that. Hitoshi has a quiet conversation with Kirishima and Sun Eater that Shota does not listen in on, just waits, and soon enough his son then makes his way back to Shota's side as the room empties out.
Sorry. What are you apologizing for?
Hitoshi has grown so much in the last year alone, but that doesn't mean he doesn't suffer when he thinks he somehow failed.
Not stopping him? Letting him break out of my quirk?
Hitoshi seems to hear his own words and scratches the back of his neck.
Okay, maybe I'm just feeling sorry for myself. You are.
Shota retorts, but he sets a hand on his son's shoulder.
You're allowed to. Just don't mope about it. You got away from all of us, and there's too much we didn't know and couldn't predict about him. You did everything right.
Did I? He asks, looking up at Shota, gaze hard.
I used my quirk on a kid who's probably been tortured and mind-fucked before and made him panic. I'm the reason he ran away. I'm the one who asked you to.
Shota says back, and the two of them end up in a bit of a staring match. Shota blinks first.
It was a bad call. I don't want to use my power to abuse people.
Hitoshi looks away.
This felt like abuse. I know, and I'm sorry.
Deku's words echo in Shota's head.
I won't ask you to do that again. I mean, you're going to have to.
Hitoshi's laugh is almost painful to hear, making him younger and reminding Shota of the boy they'd found muzzled and hurt years ago.
That's the point, isn't it? That I'll be a hero who can make the villains talk?
Hitoshi shakes his head and straightens his spine, seeming to find himself once more.
I think we need to make sure they are villains before I do that. When there is a next time.
Because at the end of the day, they both know Deku hadn't done anything explicitly wrong, and maybe he'd needed help. And they just made it a lot harder for him to ask for help or trust when it was offered. The meeting room is empty, so Shota doesn't mind wrapping Hitoshi in a hug. For one thing, Hitoshi won't pull away if there's no one to see him do so.
We'll figure this out.
Shota promises, so damn proud.
I know.
Hitoshi says to his chest.
But, did you ever... has anyone considered he might be telling the truth?
Hitoshi asks, looking up at Shota in the circle of his arms.
That quirks are actually magical spirits that only he can see and talk to. Right.
Hitoshi buries his face against Shota's chest.
Never mind.
They have to leave it at that. The Shie Hassaikai case is too important to be distracted by one lone kid, Shota knows. It eats at him, but he has to focus. You get distracted in this line of work and you get hurt. Or worse, someone gets hurt because of you. You have to do the job in front of you, and then you worry about the next one. You have to be able to compartmentalize, especially as an underground hero. So, he focuses. But as Ashi finds him, night after night, staring at the footage of Deku in that holding cell, watching him hold something invisible, watching him rock back from being struck by a weight, watching him flinch back from whatever had broken him from Hitoshi's quirk, and he has to wonder, was there someone else in the cell the whole time? What are they missing? Izuku finds himself on the bank of the Tauka, one of the many rivers that ebb and flow in the other place, and for a moment he wonders what would happen if he just threw himself in and let it carry him away. He could drown here, he knows that, but if he floated along, where would he arrive? America? England? Somewhere else entirely? Maybe he should try to work on his English. Maybe he needed to leave Japan entirely. The tears come back hot and heavy, and gods, he's a monster! Izuku can't even deny it when he stares at his hand. He'd reached, and he'd taken, and he forged, and he'd been so angry and so scared, and he'd done to Shinso's spirit what had been done to himself. He was just as bad. He was a villain, a monster, everything they always knew he'd be. It's a struggle to get out of his hoodie. His right arm is still bleeding sluggishly from the kitsune's teeth, and his left hand is a burned wreck from the fire of the blue flame. Zar Yurkna Gun, his mind helpfully supplies. He'd not taken the spirit's whole name, but it had been a near thing. He crouches on the stony bank and submerges both wounds, and it burns all the more, but he deserves that. Deserves the pain, deserves everything they say about him because he'd broken his own promise. He very nearly does fall in. After, he isn't sure if he just wasn't paying attention or if it was a subconscious attempt to give up. But teeth grab the back of his shirt and drag him up to the pastel blue-green grass and dump him on his butt to stare up at the unnatural sky and oversized trees and Tamamo no Mei staring down at him.
I cannot swim,
she informs him flatly.
Do not attempt that again.
You shouldn't be here, he tells her, feeling stupid and dazed, hiccuping from his tears. You shouldn't be near me.
This is my home,
she tells him, seemingly unbothered by his outburst and how he'd attacked Zar.
If anyone should not be here, it is you.
And doesn't he know that all too well? Izuku stares at his hand, now shiny with scars pulled tight, at the terrible sky beyond it, and knows that he isn't supposed to be anywhere, that he doesn't belong and never will, and one day someone will catch him off guard and... The tears stop eventually, the way they always do. He scrubs at his face and sniffles and shifts, only to realize there's a warmth at his back.
Do you feel better?
She asks as Izuku sits up and registers that Tamamo no Mei had curled up alongside him. Yes, he has to admit, has to speak his truths now. Thank you.
You are not what you think you are,
she tells him, just as she did before, and here she seems so much larger. He's seated, and so is she, and she towers over him, each of her tails the size of his whole body.
You are a kid. I think too many forget what they are like.
I'm a kid? He's unfamiliar with the term. No one has used that against him yet, at least.
A pup, a young one, a child,
she explains with seemingly infinite patience.
You have not been taught anything.
Izuku laughs so hard that he ends up leaning against her, and somehow she allows it. Oh, I've had plenty of spirits teach me, he assures her so bitterly that the grass around them wilts at his words. Every single one of them had me pay them for it, too.
They taught you what they wanted you to know, not what you needed to know.
She nudges him with her nose.
You are not a monster.
He wants to believe her, but he can't. Not after today. He pulls away from her warmth, afraid of the false kindness and what it will end up costing him this time. How the hell can you say that? She'd been there. She'd seen what he did, felt what he did. And she must know what he'd done and knew what he could do.
You were scared, she says simply. Instinct is something we all must learn to control.
It's not an excuse. Izuku makes himself get up, get away from the comfort she represents because she's Eraserhead's spirit, and she'd never made an agreement, there was no contract, and he can't afford to lose anything else. It's never an excuse to hurt someone. He collects his dirty hoodie, his blanket, and his book, and clutches them to his chest. Thank you for staying with me. He finally settles on because he has no reason to be rude. I'm going now.
I could teach you.
No! Not now, at least, and probably not ever. All he wants is to go home and put up his wards and ignore every spirit who bothers him for the next week at a minimum. Go back to your human. He has a case to solve. She slowly moves to stand, and he is faced with her true size, her true power, as she looms over him.
Yes,
she says, as if unaware of how intimidating she might be.
He has his case and a child to save, along with many others.
Izuku doesn't rise to the bait. They don't need him. They wouldn't even believe him if he tried to help again. They'd lock him up, and he'd lose himself all over again. And he's done. Heroes can be heroes. He'll focus on helping the people they can't save. He turns and walks away. He doesn't have the energy to push his way back through to humanity right now. He'll have to find a connection to a shrine and then head home from there. Hopefully, he won't end up in Aomori again. He doesn't have any money for a ticket home. Shota hates hospitals. Their victory comes at a cost, as so many victories do. He watches from the doorway as Yagi and Mirio say their strangled goodbyes to Sasuke, and it never gets easier. It never does. Every time they lose a hero to madmen like Chisaki, to the people who see the flaws in the world and think the solution is to remake it in their own image, it burns. Nighteye was a damn good hero, and the world is going to hurt for the loss, and no amount of platitudes will make it better, even as said hero's last words ask them all to strive for more. He checks in on the rest of his people, his students, and the other pro-heroes. He'd helped lead this charge, and he takes responsibility for where things went wrong, listens to what went right. Later, they'll probably debrief, but some things are important to get now, while the memories are fresh and unclouded with time. Some horrors, you have to bleed out little by little before they poison everything. He makes the rounds, doubling back to meet with those who were asleep the first time. At some point, someone sits him down to have some food, but Shota doesn't remember eating it, just throwing the empty wrapper away. A coffee is likewise offered and disappears without memory, but he carries the empty cup around for more than half an hour. The hospital goes dark as the evening draws in, but no one suggests that he go home. He settles in a corner of Eri's room, the pale young girl still unconscious, and makes sure the nurses know where he is in case he's needed. Izashi assures him that he understands, and promises to keep an eye on Hitoshi and the cats, and Shota closes his eyes and does not expect that he will actually manage to sleep. It is very early in the morning when he wakes to the sound of someone moving in the room. He thinks it might be a nurse at first, but his eyes focus to see Mirio standing at the foot of Eri's bed, bandaged and bruised and looking defeated in the quiet hours. Sasuke is his first personal death, Shota suspects. It won't be Mirio's last, but the first one, Shota knows, that leaves its own kind of mark. This is the sort of thing he'd usually leave to Inui, but the man's not here and Shota has a duty to his students, even the third years. So he shifts, making sure the uncomfortable plastic chair he's curled in creaks so that Mirio doesn't startle and irritate his injuries.
You're supposed to be in your room.
He might be a teacher, but he doesn't coddle his students. Mirio wouldn't want to be coddled. Besides, Mirio has a complex about appearing to be at his best no matter what state he's in, which Shota has opinions about. Sensei! Mirio smiles the same way that Yagi does, brilliant and empty. I'm sorry, did I wake you?
No.
He gets to his feet and stretches, coming to stand at the foot of Eri's bed, not exactly beside Mirio, but next to him nonetheless.
Why are you up?
I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd take a bit of a walk and see how Eri's doing.
Walking on your injuries, I recall you being expressively told not to aggravate.
Showed his eyes.
She's going to be all right.
Mirio nods and keeps staring at the slow rise and fall of her tiny chest. Her heart monitor and the oxygen are the only sounds in the room, though they simply combine with the entire makeup of the hospital at large. Shota waits. Sir was... Mirio stops, bites his lip. I keep seeing the fight, over and over in my head. If I'd let go of her, I could have saved Sir. And this really is a conversation he'd rather leave to someone else because Shota knows he's not exactly the gentlest touch. On the other hand, Mirio Togata is All Might's heir and poorly kept secret as far as he was concerned. And harsh truths might be what he needs.
You wish you'd saved him instead.
No! Mirio's voice is rough, but the response is instant, and he seems to catch himself, hands slapped across his mouth. But Eri does not stir. No, he says again, quieter, but stronger. I don't. But I do. I keep thinking I should have found some way to do both, or if I'd put her down, I could have come back. I could have saved him. I should have saved him.
You should be dead.
Shota watches Mirio turn to stare at him, eyes large in his pallid face, a look of confused betrayal, and yeah, this is why he isn't the one to give these speeches. Sensei? Shota shrugs.
From Shisaki's point of view, we both should be dead. That's the problem with should. It doesn't do you any favors. Should doesn't mean anything unless you have something that you can actually do. Should is the excuse. Would, can, will. Those are what are more important.
Mirio stares at him still, and Shota meets his gaze evenly.
The fight with Chisaki. Is there one thing you think you could have done better? now that you look back at it. Realistically.
Mirio does him the service of actually thinking about it. I can't think of a way to save Sir without risking Eri. Shota hums.
So are you saying you should have risked her when she was specifically your mission?
No! Mirio reaches and holds onto the railing at the foot of Eri's bed. He could dent the metal, Shota thinks, but the grip is careful. Mirio has always been so careful.
Suggesting then that Nighteye should have backed off. Should have done anything but fight with everything he had.
No!
Should is for when you chose to do something selfish or stupid. You should have listened to your teachers. You should have woken up earlier. You should have remembered a damned umbrella. Should isn't for hero fights unless you think you fucked up.
Shota doesn't temper his words.
You did what you needed to do, what you were trained to do, what you had to do, and you saved a little girl from a sadist. Should is for guilt, and guilt isn't going to get you anywhere.
Then why do I feel like this? Mirio bends over the railing and Shota can hear his voice crack. Why?
Because you're human.
Shota thinks about being Mirio's age, thinks about someone else's endless energy and optimism and how easily it had been taken from them. He remembers how that felt, because sometimes he still feels it.
You're human, and being a hero doesn't trump that. So you're happy Eri's safe, and you're hurting that Sasuke's gone, and you're angry at Chisaki and at Eri and at yourself, because the situation exists, and you're angry at yourself for being angry at a little girl who isn't at all at fault.
Mirio's shock is palpable. Shota doesn't stop.
Despite what you've been told, heroes aren't flawless bastions of self-sacrifice. No one is expecting you to just get over this, except perhaps you. We have all lost someone or something precious, and if you look at the numbers, the chances of a hero dying to protect a civilian are high, because civilians are stupid and easily panicked, and when a 10-ton monster, or a toxic gas cloud, or a maniac with bombs for hair shows up intent on chaos, civilians don't think. It's not their fault. The average person isn't built to handle this. If they were, we wouldn't need heroes at all.
Shota leans back on his heels, hands in his pockets, and back cracking as he bends as far as it will go.
I'm sure they gave you the line that a hero is someone who moves without even thinking. Someone who goes in and does the job when the rest of the world stays still. And that's alright for someone like All Might to say, but it's only half the truth.
Mirio waits for him to straighten before he asks quietly, Then what's the other half?
The other half is to keep doing it.
Shota tells him wants to paint it across the walls of UA, but all he can do is teach around the realities his students face because this is something they can't really grasp until they face it themselves.
It's to deal with the stupid and the inane and the entitled, and remember, they deserve to be saved too. It's to get up in the morning after breaking arms, because a businessman was more worried about saving his briefcase than his life in a fight. And that was the call you had to make to get him out of there and to do it all over again. It's to keep moving, even when everything you do isn't enough.
Shota's hands are fists in his pockets, but Mirio can't see it.
It's to know that even if young Eri weren't going to be okay, that Nightaye's death isn't something you can quantify as worth it or worthless. Death doesn't work like that. There's no worthy sacrifice. There's just sacrifice.
Shota nods at the bed, at the girl, at the oxygen mask and the heart monitor, and at very many bandages and scars.
And there's no world out there where Mirai Sasuke doesn't do everything he can to save her, no matter what it costs him. Because the man was a hero.
Mirio is crying in full force now, tears running down his face and shoulders high. He taught me. He made me who I am. Shota doesn't say no, you made you who you are. He just helped you find your way. He says,
And you made him proud.
It's the truth and what Mirio needs to hear, especially now. Especially because
you also gave him Byakuya. Those two would have never reconciled without you pushing for it. Don't think that means nothing.
Mirio shakes his head. It was always so obvious how much Sir missed him. And when all my... He cuts himself off, probably because he doesn't want to tell. Shota doesn't bother saying he knows. After all, how can I go on now? Mirio asks, and the heartbreak in his voice makes Shota ache in turn. How can I be a hero when...
I didn't say it was easy.
It's like this whenever a student gets hurt, even if Mirio's case is a bit more than most.
It's never easy. That's the point. That's the second half.
Shota nods at the bed once more.
There's a girl who's going to need someone to be her hero.
He points out.
You know, we had to pry her hands from you, even when she was unconscious.
Mirio looks to Eri and to his own hands. How can I?
Because a little girl who's been badly abused really needs a kid who can punch things hard or lose his pants at inopportune times.
Shota deadpans. It's worth it for the way that Mirio laughs, watery as it is.
You know we'll be working on restoring your quirk. Eri here might have answers for us, and now that the Shie Hassaikai dealt with, we can spend some time trying to track down Deku.
Shota doesn't know if he's glad or disappointed that they hadn't found the kid in the raid. The vigilante who helped Tamaki? Mirio shakes his head. But Overhaul, he said these ones were permanent.
He said a lot of things.
Shota shrugs again.
The point is, the world isn't over. You're still here. And there's a little girl who's going to think that everything that's happened is her fault, because, unfortunately, it is. Even though she's not to blame, she's the reason.
Shota has also seen just what kind of damage that can do to a child, and God only knows what she's experienced until now.
We're going to have experts in to talk to her. I'm not laying this all on you. You're still a student. But I'm going to tell you, Mirio, she's going to need to see that people don't blame her for what Chisaki did to her, not just hear it. A familiar face will help with that.
Mirio wipes at his face with his bandaged arm, and he looks better now, Shota thinks, more solid on his feet. Sir said that sometimes saving someone doesn't stop when you pull them from the building. That's why I have to keep smiling.
Save everyone with a smile.
And that's All Might's thing, and Sir Nightaye's thing, and maybe it will be Lemillion's thing. Maybe.
I think there's value in smiling for others who need it.
He says, and knows that Mirio knows his thoughts about All Might's smile.
I think they forgot to teach you something else, though.
What's that?
You're allowed to cry, too. Don't be the hero who never gets hurt, who never hurts, who never feels anything, and never shows it. At least that's my opinion on things.
He heads back to his chair and folds himself into the uncomfortable plastic.
Not if you're going to be the next symbol for people, because what kind of symbol are you giving to the next set of kids like you?
Shota leans back, looks into Mirio's expression, know that he's given the kid emotional whiplash, but hopefully some of it sinks in.
But most of all, I think you're going to be a hell of a hero, however you decide to do it.
Even without my quirk.
Remember who you're talking to.
Mirio laughs, a little less watery this time. Does that mean you'll be giving me lessons on using a capture weapon?
We'll wait for your injuries to heal.
Shota nods, proud of this kid.
Then we'll get you a training schedule.
How long did it take Shinso to learn?
He'll tell you himself. Who do you think is going to be your sparring partner?
Mirio's expression is finally bright again. The smile on his face earnest and honest, not hollow and empty. He gives Shota a little bow, suddenly formal. Thank you, Sensei.
Go to bed, Mirio.
Shota never feels comfortable, but thanks. He doesn't need thanks to do his job. That's why he's underground. That's why he's a teacher.
Or have the nurse bring in a cot.
Sensei? The big-eyed look somehow never ended up forced when it was on Mirio's face.
You'll make your injuries worse sleeping on one of these chairs.
He tells him, already yawning and closing his eyes, even if it's mostly for show.
So if you're going to keep watch, at least do it properly.
He pretends to sleep, which keeps Mirio from thanking him again. But he washes through his eyelashes as another bed is wheeled in. Apparently Mirio rates something better than a cot. And he hears when Mirio settles under the covers, and when his breathing evens out into something deep and steady. Only then does Shota pull out his phone. It's late. Or early. But that doesn't mean much to the underground and the vigilantes and the people who sometimes fall in between. Overhaul's dealt with, and while that'll create another power vacuum, they'll have some quiet for a while. He'd put the call out before, and now is the time to really push for it. Someone must have laid eyes on Deku somewhere, and once Shota tracks him down, he'll talk to him properly. Get him to come in. For his sake. And Mirio's.